A scorching afternoon in Colorado. A pickup truck tearing into Sun Peak Woods. A 7-month pregnant woman forced into the back seat by her husband and his mistress before she can even scream for help. But what happens next is what shocks the entire nation. They drag her out of the truck, tie her tightly to a tree under the burning sun, and live stream her desperate struggle for the whole world to see. They think no one will know. They think no one will come. But they have no idea her mother is watching the live stream. And they have no idea how fast justice will strike when the truth explodes in broad daylight. What follows is a fight for survival, raw courage, and a courtroom showdown you will not forget. Let us know what time you are listening and where you are tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We would love to hear from you. The afternoon sun in Beacon Ridge had a sharp, unforgiving brightness that made everything look too real. Sun Peak Woods, normally cool and peaceful under the shade of tall pines, felt exposed under the harsh light that cut through the branches. Birds had gone silent, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. In the middle of that brittle stillness, a pickup truck rolled to a sudden stop, tires grinding against dirt and scattered pine needles. The passenger door flew open, and Hannah Miles stumbled out, one hand clutched instinctively to her swollen belly as the other tried to shield her eyes from the glare. Evan Miles came into view a moment later. His face was tight with irritation rather than concern, the kind of expression a man wore when dealing with a problem he believed he had been forced to handle. Brittany Cole stepped out behind him, clicking her tongue with impatience, her sunglasses gleaming in the sunlight. She looked more like someone heading to a summer outing than a woman about to commit an act that would horrify anyone who witnessed it. She held a phone in her hand, already set to record, her lips curling with a satisfied smirk. Hannah tried to back away, but Evan grabbed her arm and yanked her forward. Her breath hitched as pain shot through her abdomen. 7 months pregnant and already dehydrated from the heat, she struggled to stay steady on her feet. Her hair clung to her temples, damp from sweat. She whispered Evan's name, hoping for even a flicker of the man she once loved. Evan refused to look at her. His jaw clenched as he pulled her toward a tall pine tree with rough bark and low branches. Brittany lifted her phone higher. "Start talking," Brittany ordered in a sing-song voice. "Tell everyone what a liar you are." Hannah's voice cracked. "Please, stop. I did nothing to you." "That is not what he thinks," Brittany said. "And everyone deserves to know the truth, right?" She tapped the screen. The live stream began. Comments started appearing immediately from unsuspecting viewers who had no idea what they were watching. Brittany angled the camera dramatically toward Hannah's terrified face. The sunlight struck Hannah's features with unkind clarity, highlighting the fear, the sweat, the trembling of her hands as she tried to protect her stomach. Without hesitation, Evan grabbed a length of rope from the bed of the truck. He wrapped it around Hannah's wrists and pulled hard. She winced sharply as the fibers scraped her skin. The rope was rough, old, and dry, from years of being tossed in the back of the truck. He looped the rest around the tree trunk, jerking it tight until Hannah could barely move. Her breathing turned shallow as her back pressed against the bark. "Evan, please," she whispered. "It is too hot. I can barely breathe." That is your problem," he replied. Brittany laughed and stepped closer. "Smile for the viewers. You wanted attention. Now you have it." Hannah blinked rapidly, her vision beginning to blur from the intensity of the heat. She tried to shift her weight to relieve pressure on her abdomen, but the rope held her in place. The sun pressed down on her cheeks and neck like a heavy hand. Her lungs tightened. Every breath felt thin. She could feel her body screaming for water, for shade, for help. At that exact moment, miles away, her mother kneeled beside her rose bushes, trimming a branch with careful hands. Elaine Carter had planned a quiet afternoon. She wiped sweat from her forehead, reached for her watering can, and heard her phone buzz on the patio table. The screen showed a notification from the family sync app linked to Hannah's account. The thumbnail looked strange. Sunlight, trees, a woman's shape. Elaine tapped the notification. The video opened, and for a moment, she could not breathe. Her daughter stood bound to a tree, face flushed from the heat, eyes wide with terror. Behind her, Brittany's voice filled the speakers, cruel and mocking. Evan moved into frame, adjusting the rope as if tuning an instrument. Hannah begged softly. Her voice cracked in a way Elaine had never heard. It cut straight through her chest. Elaine dropped the watering can. Water splashed across the patio in chaotic arcs. Her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the phone. Her breath came in sharp gasps as she fumbled for her keys. She sprinted to her car, her heart pounding so hard she felt it in her throat. She dialed 911 while turning the ignition. "My daughter," she cried. "My daughter is pregnant, and they tied her to a tree. They are live streaming it. They are in Sun Peak Woods. Send help now." Her voice broke, but she kept driving. The gravel road shook the car violently as she pushed faster than she should have. Sunlight flickered through the trees like shards of glass. Every second mattered. Every minute felt stolen from her daughter's life. She clutched the steering wheel tightly, whispering Hannah's name, praying she was still conscious, praying the rope had not cut off circulation, praying the heat had not overwhelmed her already stressed body. Back in the woods, the live stream continued. Hannah's head dropped forward as a wave of dizziness washed over her. She tried to keep her eyes open, to stay awake, to protect the life inside her. The ground blurred, her lips dried. The world around her shimmered like a mirage. Evan stepped back, satisfied with his work. Brittany moved the camera closer, the sunlight hitting the lens and creating a harsh glare that washed over the screen. "Look at her," Brittany said. "Look at what she does for attention." Hannah whispered again. "Please, the baby, please." Her voice was nearly inaudible. The camera shook slightly as Brittany kicked the stand to reposition it. The screen flashed white from the sunlight, and everything went unstable for a moment. The glare consumed the image. The world teetered on the edge of something terrible. The live stream flickered. The heat pressed down on Hannah with a weight that felt heavier than her own body. Her breath came in shallow bursts, each one thinner than the last. Sweat gathered along her hairline and trickled down her cheeks, mixing with the dust that clung to her skin. The rope around her wrists rubbed deeper as she tried to shift her stance, but every movement only tightened the knot Evan had pulled a few minutes earlier. Her vision swayed slightly, and the sunlight above her seemed to vibrate in a way that made it hard to focus on anything more than a few feet away. Evan stood several steps back, watching her with a look that blended irritation and a strange, cruel satisfaction. He crossed his arms and glanced at Brittany, who continued to hold the phone in front of her face, making sure the live stream remained steady. She angled the camera deliberately, adjusting the frame to capture Hannah's flushed cheeks and trembling posture. The bright afternoon light made every detail harshly visible. There was no mercy in the sun that beat down from above, no shade to soften the situation or protect Hannah from the direct heat. Brittany let out a short, amused laugh as she zoomed the camera closer. "Look at her," she said. "She cannot even stand straight. What happened to that confidence you had when you said you would ruin our lives?" Her tone was filled with mockery, but there was also an edge of excitement, as if this cruelty gave her a sense of control she had been craving for months. She stepped closer to Hannah and tapped the blade of a small folding knife against her palm. Hannah lifted her head slowly, her lips dry and cracked. "Please, you do not understand," she whispered. "The baby cannot handle this. I feel dizzy. I need water. I need to sit down. Please." Her voice shook, and every word felt like it was scraping its way out of her throat. She tried to take a deeper breath, but the heat pressed into her lungs, making the simple act of breathing feel painfully difficult. Evan scoffed. "You always make everything dramatic," he said. "You have been lying for months. This is what it takes for people to see who you really are." He gestured toward the camera with a careless flick of his hand. "You wanted attention. Now you have it. Maybe someone will finally understand why I cannot stay married to someone like you." Brittany lowered the knife and held it near the rope, letting the blade rest lightly against the tensioned cord. "Should we give them a little scare?" she asked, smiling. "Just enough to make the live stream go crazy." She pressed the metal a little harder, making the rope dip slightly. Hannah felt a jolt of fear that shot straight through her stomach. Her knees weakened, and she tried to lean away, but she could not move far enough to escape the threat. "Do not," Hannah begged. "I am begging you. Think about the baby, please." Her voice cracked as she felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She shut her eyes for a moment, trying to steady herself, but the sunlight seemed brighter when she opened them again. Her pulse thudded rapidly in her ears. She tried to inhale slowly, but it came out as a shaky gasp. Far away, Elaine's car sped down a dusty road, leaving a trail of swirling dirt behind it. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her fingers ached. Tears blurred her vision, and she wiped them away with the back of her wrist without slowing down. Her heart pounded with a desperate, frantic rhythm. The image of her daughter tied to a tree burned in her mind, along with the sound of Hannah's frightened voice echoing from the live stream. She dialed 911 again, her breath uneven. "Please hurry," she whispered. "She cannot take the heat. She is pregnant. She looks like she is going to faint. Please, please hurry!" The dispatcher tried to reassure her, but nothing could calm the storm of fear rising inside her chest. She pressed harder on the gas pedal, her car jolting over every bump in the dirt road as she raced into the forest. Back in the woods, Brittany glanced at the screen of her phone, noticing the number of viewers increasing. "People love this," she said with a gleam in her eyes. "Look at these comments. They think she is insane. They think she tied herself up to blame you." She laughed lightly, enjoying the attention she was getting. Hannah's breathing turned faster. Her legs began to wobble, and she leaned heavily against the tree for support. She blinked several times, trying to clear the haze forming over her vision. The world around her felt like it was tilting slightly to the left. Her stomach tightened in a painful knot. A sharp pulse of discomfort shot through her lower abdomen. Evan stepped closer. "Stop pretending," he said. "Nothing is wrong with you. If you faint, it is your own fault." His voice had lost any trace of kindness that once existed in their marriage. Instead, each word carried an icy certainty. He believed the story he was creating. He believed the lies he had been spreading for months. More importantly, he believed that the live stream would make people think Hannah was unstable. Hannah tried to speak again, but only a hoarse whisper came out. She swallowed, but her throat was too dry. She could feel her pulse racing, her thoughts scattering, her body losing strength with each passing second. She tried to lift her head, but it dropped forward again. The sunlight felt hotter, too hot. Elaine continued to run deeper into the woods. After abandoning her car near a narrow trail the vehicle could not pass. Branches brushed against her arms, but she barely felt them. She shouted her daughter's name, voice breaking from fear and exhaustion. She sprinted toward the faint sound of voices ahead, praying she would reach her in time. In the clearing, Brittany crouched to adjust the angle of the phone. Evan stepped toward the camera to read a comment, then turned and kicked the tripod lightly to shift its position. The live stream shook violently, and the screen blurred in the sudden burst of bright sunlight. The clearing in Sun Peak Woods felt even hotter as the minutes passed, as if the sunlight itself was taking sides and choosing to expose everything that had been hidden for far too long. The livestream camera sat crooked on the ground after Evan kicked it, still broadcasting the shaking image of Hannah tied to the tree. The comments scrolled rapidly. Some viewers were confused. Others were laughing. A few were asking if the scene was real. Hannah barely registered any of it. Her thoughts blurred under the pounding heat and the rising panic inside her chest. Evan crouched down in front of the phone, brushing dirt off the lens with the sleeve of his shirt. He inspected the comments as if he were reviewing something trivial, not a crime unfolding in real time. He seemed proud of the way people reacted to the video, proud of the twisted story he had been spinning for months. His breathing was steady, too steady for someone standing in the middle of something so cruel. He looked satisfied with the chaos he was controlling. Brittany stood behind him, tapping the side of her sunglasses in a nervous rhythm. Her expression was sharper now. The thrill she had shown earlier shifted to something colder, more focused. She glanced at Hannah, then at Evan, as if calculating each next move. When Evan finished checking the camera, he stood upright again, dusting off his jeans before turning toward Hannah with a hard stare. "You did this to yourself," he said. "People can see it now. There is no point pretending." Hannah lifted her head slowly, the rope scraping against her wrists again. "I did nothing," she whispered. "You know I did nothing." Her voice was stronger than before, but only slightly. She struggled to keep her balance. Her legs trembled uncontrollably, her body pleading for rest, for shade, for mercy. Each heartbeat echoed in her ears with a slow, painful thud. Brittany stepped closer, lowering her sunglasses just enough so Hannah could see her eyes. They held no sympathy. "You should have kept quiet," she said in a low voice meant only for Hannah. "We gave you chances. You ruined everything. Evan deserves better than a woman who tries to trap him." Hannah's breath caught. "Trap him? How could I trap my own husband? I am carrying his child." Brittany leaned in until her face was only a foot away. "That is what you say." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But everyone knows you cannot handle being alone. You would say anything to keep him. People will believe us once this video goes viral." The lies echoed through the clearing. They felt heavier than the heat. Hannah's stomach tightened painfully as her fear deepened. She tried to shift her stance to relieve the pressure, but she barely moved an inch. The rope held firm. Evan walked toward the truck and pulled out a dirty cloth. "We need to make the scene look real," he said without turning around. "If anyone shows up, they need to think she did this herself. That way, it all matches what we said before." He wiped sweat off his forehead and glanced back at Hannah. "She has always been dramatic. Everyone knows that. She will look unstable. They will think she did this because she wanted attention." Hannah forced a breath through her tightening chest. "Why are you doing this? You are my husband. You know I have never lied to you." Her voice cracked as a weak tremor ran through her legs. "Please, stop. I cannot breathe. The baby cannot breathe." Evan froze for a moment. The slightest flicker of hesitation crossed his face, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Brittany noticed the shift and stepped closer to him. She rested her hand on his arm gently. "Do not let her trick you again," she said. "You know how she is. We talked about this. She uses emotions to control you. You said so yourself. She did the same thing when she cried at the dealership and made you feel guilty about the loan. She always manipulates you." Evan's jaw tightened again. "She did. She always does." Hannah heard their whispered exchange and felt a sharp ache in her chest that had nothing to do with the heat. "Evan, you are not thinking clearly," she said, trying to steady her breath. "This is not you. This is wrong. I never tried to control you. I only wanted our family to be safe." "Yeah." Brittany laughed quietly. "Family, you had your chance. You ruined it when you started telling people he was cheating. You should not have said anything. If you had stayed quiet, we would not be here." The sunlight flickered across Brittany's sunglasses. Her expression hardened further. She stepped even closer to Hannah until they were nearly eye to eye. She whispered so softly that only Hannah could hear. "If you disappear, everything gets easier." Hannah's breath caught sharply, and her body froze. The world around her seemed to tilt for a moment. The trees blurred at the edges. Her pulse stuttered. She could not tell if the ground was shaking or if her vision was failing again. Brittany pulled back, smiling faintly, as if she had just shared a secret. She walked over to Evan and touched his shoulder lightly. "She is getting worse," Brittany said. "She looks unstable. Anyone who sees this will think she tied herself up because she is hysterical. We just need a few more minutes of footage, then we will delete everything on our phones and say she had an episode." Evan nodded. "That will work. People already think she makes things up." Hannah could barely hear them now. A ringing sound pulsed in her ears. She felt sweat dripping down her back. The heat pressed against her chest like a weight. She tried to take a deeper breath, but her lungs refused to expand fully. Her vision flickered again, the treetops swaying in a strange, disjointed rhythm. She remembered Elaine's voice, her mother's laughter during morning coffee, the way her hands always felt steady and warm. She clung to that memory as her legs weakened again. Far away on the trail, Elaine stumbled but forced herself to keep running. She followed the faint voices, the echo of laughter, the distant murmur of the live stream playing through her phone. She could hear Brittany's mocking tone. She could hear Hannah pleading faintly in the background. The sound drove her forward with a determination that burned stronger than the sun above her. Back in the clearing, Evan tapped the phone on the ground with his shoe, adjusting the angle once more. The camera's view shifted slightly, capturing Hannah's weakening form again. The live stream trembled as his foot nudged it, and the image shook in a harsh burst of reflected sunlight. Elaine Carter pushed herself deeper into Sun Peak Woods, her breaths coming out sharp and uneven as she forced her legs to keep moving. The narrow trail beneath her feet twisted between tall pines and sun-bleached patches of earth. The afternoon light poured through the branches, painting shifting streaks across the ground, but none of its warmth reached her. All she felt was fear, breathless, urgent fear. She clutched her phone in one hand, following the small, blinking icon on the GPS that tracked the last location of her daughter's device. Every few seconds she looked at it again, terrified the signal might vanish. The woods were quiet except for the pounding of her heartbeat and the occasional rustle of leaves brushing against her arms as she ran. Sweat rolled down her forehead, but she did not stop to wipe it away. Every second she lost was another second. Hannah remained tied to a tree under the scorching Sunday. The live stream had shown enough to send waves of panic through her, but the thought of what might be happening now pushed her faster than she had ever moved in her life. Elaine stumbled on a root and caught herself against a trunk, gasping for breath. She lifted her head, listening. For a moment the woods were silent. Then she heard it. A soft, broken sound. A strained gasp. A voice she had known since the day Hannah was born. "Mom," the voice whispered faintly ahead. Elaine straightened sharply, her heart twisted painfully. She pushed forward again, moving through bushes and branches, without caring if they scratched her arms or legs. She saw bits of torn fabric snagged on thorns, a small blue hair tie Hannah often wore when cleaning the house, a scuffed shoe print dragging across the dirt. The signs grew more frequent and more desperate. They told the story of someone struggling, someone pulled, someone hurt. Ahead, the sunlight brightened through a gap in the trees, forming a glowing doorway of sorts. Elaine slowed her steps as she approached the edges of the clearing. The air grew hotter. The smell of dust and sap and sun-baked earth filled her lungs. She heard voices again, this time more clearly. "Just keep recording," Brittany said sharply. Elaine felt her stomach churn. She pressed forward until the full clearing came into view. For a moment she could not breathe. She saw her daughter tied to a tree, slumped forward, her skin flushed a deep red from the heat. The rope bit into her wrists. Her swollen belly strained against her thin shirt. Hannah's eyes were barely open, but when they lifted and met Elaine's across the clearing, something inside Elaine broke. "Hannah," she whispered, the word escaping her lips like a prayer. Then her voice rose with a force she did not know she possessed. "Hannah, I am here." Hannah's chin trembled. Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes. She strained against the rope. "Mom," she whispered again, her voice faint, as if she were afraid speaking too loudly would make everything worse. Elaine ran forward without any hesitation, her legs fueled by something beyond fear. Her instinct, her love, everything that made her a mother propelled her. She reached Hannah's side and cupped her daughter's face gently. The heat radiating from her skin alarmed her instantly. "You are burning up," she said softly. "Oh, sweetheart, I am here now. I am here. Breathe slowly for me." Hannah tried to inhale, but it shook with weakness. Elaine pressed her forehead against her daughter's for a moment, letting Hannah know she was no longer alone. Behind them, Brittany yanked down her sunglasses and stepped forward with a glare. "What do you think you are doing?" she snapped. Elaine turned her head slowly, her eyes sharp. "Get away from her!" Evan joined Brittany with an irritated frown. "You should not be here," he said. "You are interfering. This is not what it looks like." Elaine rose to her feet and faced them. "I saw everything," she said, her voice steady. "Your video, your threats, your lies." She pointed to the phone still lying on the ground, recording the moment. "You broadcast it to everyone. You made sure the entire world could watch what you were doing to her." Brittany scoffed. "She did this to herself. She tied herself. She wanted attention." Elaine's eyes blazed with disbelief. "You expect anyone to believe that? She is 7 months pregnant. She can barely stand. She can barely breathe." Hannah let out a weak groan behind her. Elaine immediately knelt again, checking her daughter's pulse with trembling fingers. She murmured gently, soothing her as best she could. "Hold on. Help is coming. Just hold on." The faint wail of sirens in the distance reached her ears. It echoed through the trees like a promise. A small wave of relief washed over her, but it was thin and fragile. They were still too far. Hannah's breaths were too shallow. The heat was too intense. Elaine looked at the rope and tugged it hard, but it was tied in a complicated knot. Panic rose again in her chest. "I need a knife," she said aloud. "I need something to cut this." Brittany shook her head. "You are not touching her." Elaine whipped her head toward her. "You do not get to decide that." Evan stepped between them. "Don't make this harder." Elaine rose again, her voice steady in a way that surprised even her. "It is already hard. You made it hard. You made it cruel. You hurt my daughter. You hurt my grandchild." Evan opened his mouth to argue, but the sound of footsteps and rustling branches cut him off. The first police officers stepped into the clearing. Their uniforms gleamed in the sunlight. Their hands hovered near their holsters as they surveyed the scene with quick, trained eyes. Elaine stepped back slightly, raising her hands to show she was not a threat. "She needs help," she said urgently. "She is pregnant. She has been tied up for too long. She is dehydrated. Please." The officers rushed to Hannah, One pulled out a knife to cut the rope. Another radioed for immediate medical backup. Elaine moved aside, tears running freely as she watched them work. She kept whispering Hannah's name, trying to keep her daughter awake. Behind the officers, Evan shifted his weight nervously, glancing toward the tree line, as if considering escape. Brittany lowered her phone slowly, her confidence draining. The clearing, once filled with sunlight and cruel laughter, now felt heavy with truth. The police continued moving around them, securing the scene, assessing the injuries, gathering evidence. And as officers moved into position, their shadows stretched across the clearing, announcing that everything was about to change. The clearing remained bright under the unforgiving Colorado sun, and every second felt louder than the last. Officers moved quickly across the dirt, their boots snapping twigs and crunching through layers of dry pine needles. The voices of law enforcement rose and fell in short bursts as they secured the area, marked evidence, and coordinated with incoming units. In the middle of all the commotion, Hannah still lay on the ground beside the tree where she had been tied. Her breaths were shallow. Her skin glowed an unhealthy red. Sweat pooled at her temples and soaked the collar of her shirt. The heat clung to her like a heavy blanket she could not push away. Elaine stayed close to her daughter, keeping a protective hand on her shoulder and another shading her eyes from the Sunday. Hannah's pulse fluttered beneath Elaine's fingers. Each faint beat filled Elaine with more urgency. She looked toward the tree line often, hoping to see paramedics appear at any moment. She knew they were somewhere nearby, but navigating the tight trails and uneven ground slowed them. She could only wait and pray. Near the edge of the clearing, an officer knelt and examined something half buried in dust. He reached down and lifted a cell phone with a cracked screen. The device was scuffed, still warm from the heat. As he tapped the power button, the screen lit up faintly. A frozen frame from the live stream filled the display with distorted colors and harsh sunlight. The officer raised his eyebrows. "This must be the suspect's phone," he said to another officer who approached. "The live stream is still open. Looks like it kept recording until the battery nearly died." The second officer leaned closer. "Check for saved videos. This might be important." The first officer navigated through the gallery. His expression shifted as he scrolled. Dozens of thumbnails appeared. Most showed Hannah crying or struggling. Others showed messages, voice memos, screenshots, plans. The officer stood and immediately carried the phone to the supervising sergeant. "This is bad," he said. "There is a full trail of coordination between the suspects. They have been planning this for a while." The sergeant took the phone and scanned the contents. "Get this to digital forensics. Make copies of everything. We will need this for the report." The officer nodded and hurried toward the patrol car. At the same time, the police radio crackled to life. Dispatch relayed multiple civilian reports. "We have additional calls from residents," one voice said. Many viewers captured copies of the live stream before the feed cut out. Several have submitted screenshots to our online portal. They include timestamps and comments. The sergeant's expression hardened. "Good. That means we have witnesses. The live stream is going to be strong evidence." Another officer approached him. "Sir, a few locals even recognized that this was happening in Sun Peak Woods. They tried to pin the approximate location on a map and sent it in." He nodded. "We will follow up on each one. Keep searching for items the suspects left behind." The sergeant's voice carried through the clearing, commanding and steady. Officers fanned out across the area, tracing footprints, photographing the ground, and gathering anything that looked out of place. Every step revealed more evidence. A piece of rope fiber, a torn piece of clothing, a shoe print that did not match Hannah's. The truth was becoming visible in the harsh sunlight, piece by piece. Far from the clearing, Evan and Brittany pushed through the thick brush, trying to escape deeper into the woods. Evan's clothes were covered in dirt. His face was twisted in frustration and panic. Brittany stumbled along behind him, her breathing ragged. "This is your fault," Evan snapped. "If you had not dropped your phone, we would have been gone by now." "My fault?" Brittany shouted back. "You asked me to film it. You were the one who wanted proof she was unstable. You told me to keep recording everything." "I never told you to leave evidence," Evan said. "You should have been careful. You should have been smarter," she fired back. "You knew the live stream was risky. You wanted people to think she tied herself. But now they have everything. They have the video. They probably found the messages. They might even have the recordings." Evan spun around and pointed a trembling finger at her. "Do not say that. Do not talk about the recordings. Brittany shook her head, her hair sticking to her damp cheeks. We are not getting out of this. Do you understand that? We might as well tell the truth. Evan's eyes flashed with rage. You are not telling anyone anything! Brittany's breath hitched. For a moment, fear flickered across her face. She tightened her hold on the branch she had grabbed earlier, though she said nothing. Back in the clearing, the investigation continued. An officer knelt near the spot where Brittany had stood earlier, examining footprints in the dirt. He called out, "Their trail goes this way." They ran toward the north side of the woods. The sergeant nodded. Send 2 teams after them. They will not get far. 2 groups of officers broke off and moved into the woods with steady, coordinated steps. Elaine watched them go, hope growing inside her. She knew the officers were close. She knew they would find Evan and Brittany soon. The thought brought her a small sense of relief, but she could not rest until Hannah received real medical attention. Hannah groaned softly, shifting her weight. Elaine bent down and pressed a hand to her cheek. "I am here," she whispered. "Stay awake for me. The paramedics are coming." Hannah's lips parted slightly, but only a whisper escaped. The sun beat down on her skin, and the heat shimmered faintly around her like a dangerous halo. Elaine gently fanned her daughter with her hand, trying to give her some relief. Across the clearing, an officer reviewed the live stream on his tablet. Civilians had already submitted several clips. Each one was clear and detailed. The officers could see Evan tying the rope. They could see Brittany threatening Hannah. They could hear their voices, their words, their intent. "It is all here," the officer said. "Everything they did, everything they planned. They filmed it themselves." The sergeant nodded grimly. They destroyed their own alibi. The sunlight continued to pour over the clearing, revealing every truth the suspects had tried to hide. Nothing remained in shadows. Nothing remained protected. Evidence lay everywhere, scattered in the dirt like pieces of a puzzle that finally made sense. And as the officers continued to uncover each piece, one undeniable fact became clearer with every passing moment. Evan and Brittany's plan was collapsing in broad daylight. The afternoon sun bore down on the clearing with relentless heat. The ground shimmered as if the air itself were trembling. Dust drifted above the trampled earth where Hannah had fought for her life only minutes earlier. Now she lay on her side near the base of the tree, her breaths thin and unsteady. The rope that once trapped her hung loose beside her, frayed where the officer had cut it. Sweat pooled across her skin, and her shirt clung to her as if it weighed her down. Her eyelids fluttered as she struggled to stay conscious. Elaine stayed close beside her. She knelt in the dirt without hesitation, one hand cupping Hannah's warm cheek, while the other shielded her daughter's eyes from the blazing sunlight. "Stay with me," she whispered softly. "Do not close your eyes. You need to stay awake." The fear in her voice trembled beneath her words, yet she kept her expression steady for her daughter's sake. The clearing buzzed with movement as officers spread out. Their radios crackled. Branches rustled as they searched for evidence and scanned the surrounding woods for signs of movement. The noise blended together until the clearing felt alive, vibrating with urgency. Then, suddenly, a loud crashing sound echoed from the left side of the woods. Elaine's head snapped up. Branches snapped violently. Footsteps pounded across the brush. A figure burst through the tree line at full speed, stumbling into the sunlight. It was Brittany. Her face was smeared with dirt. Her clothes were torn. Her breaths came in sharp gasps as she clutched a thick branch in her right hand. She spun around, panic clear in her eyes, as if she had been running blindly without knowing where she was going. When she saw the clearing, she froze for a split second. Then her expression twisted into something furious and wild. She took several uneven steps forward, gripping the branch so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Elaine immediately rose to her feet and positioned herself between Brittany and her daughter. "Do not take another step," she warned, voice low but unshaken. "You will not touch her again." Brittany's breath caught and then released in a desperate, shaking exhale. "You think you can stop this?" she said. Her voice cracked under the strain. "You think you can protect her after what she has done? She destroyed everything." "She is 7 months pregnant," Elaine said steadily. "Everything that happened here today was your choice, and you will not get near her." Before Brittany could answer, another explosion of movement came from the opposite side of the clearing. Evan crashed through the brush with a violent shove, tripping over an exposed root before catching himself. His chest heaved as he whipped around, scanning for an escape. Dirt streaked his face and shirt. His eyes darted wildly between the officers in the distance and the open clearing in front of him. He did not seem to recognize where he was until he saw Hannah lying on the ground and Elaine guarding her. His jaw tightened. Then anger, fear, and disbelief rushed across his face all at once. "No," he muttered. "Not here. Not now." He tried to back up, but the officers behind him shouted for him to stop. He panicked and moved forward instead, stumbling into the clearing toward Elaine. Elaine widened her stance. "Stay back," she said sharply. Evan lifted a hand as if to silence her. "You do not understand," he said. "I need to get out of here. Brittany, let's go." Brittany snapped her head toward him. "We cannot go," she shouted. "They surrounded the whole forest. We are trapped." Evan stepped toward her. "We can run. Just move." "Where?" she cried, pointing to the officers closing in behind the trees. "They are everywhere." The tension thickened. Hannah let out a soft groan behind Elaine, drawing both Evan's and Brittany's eyes toward her. The sight of her struggling to breathe under the harsh daylight caused a flicker of shock to cross Evan's face. Then frustration swallowed it. "This is her fault," he said through clenched teeth. Elaine's voice cut through the heat like a blade. "You tied her to a tree. You filmed her. You humiliated her. You nearly killed your own child." "That was not the plan," Evan snapped. "She was supposed to admit what she did. She was supposed to stop lying." "She told the truth," Elaine said. "You two just could not handle it." Brittany let out a choked sound. Rage trembled in her hands. She raised the branch slightly. If she had stayed quiet, none of this would have happened. Elaine stepped in front of her again. "Put it down!" Brittany stepped forward instead. At that moment, the woods erupted with shouts. "Police! Drop the weapon!" Several officers surged into the clearing from both sides. Their steps were firm and fast. Their presence filled the space with authority so powerful it cut through the tension like a sudden gust of wind. Brittany jerked in surprise. She spun around as if searching for an escape route, but found only officers closing in. "Drop it," one officer commanded. Her chest heaved. Sweat dripped down her chin. Her fingers trembled violently as she gripped the branch tighter. "You do not understand," she cried. "She ruined us." Evan took a stumbling step backward. Wait. We did not mean—" "Hands up," an officer ordered. Evan froze. For a moment, the heat, the dust, and the tension all seemed to thicken around them. The clearing felt like a pressure chamber on the verge of exploding. Brittany let out one final cry and lifted the branch over her shoulder. Officers rushed forward. Two seized her arms. One knocked the branch from her grasp. It hit the ground with a hollow thud. Brittany screamed as they forced her wrists together and secured them with cuffs. Her cries echoed through the clearing, filled with anger and wild panic. Evan stumbled backward as officers advanced on him, but instead of resisting, he turned sharply and bolted through a narrow path between the trees, disappearing into the woods again. Officers immediately sprinted after him, their shouts fading into the distance. The clearing fell into a tense silence. Elaine dropped to her knees beside Hannah once more. She gently lifted her daughter's head into her lap, brushing the sweat from her forehead. "You are safe," she whispered. "No one will touch you now." Hannah's fingers twitched weakly. Her eyes flickered open for a moment before closing again. Elaine held her hand. "Stay with me," she murmured. "Help is almost here." A distant rumble vibrated through the air. Elaine lifted her head. The sound grew louder. A helicopter. The rescue team was finally coming. The sunlight continued to blaze down, but for the first time since the nightmare began, Elaine felt the heat ease from her heart. Help was close, very close. The rescue team reached the clearing within minutes, guided by the frantic radio calls from the officers on the ground. The blades of the helicopter beat the air overhead, sending bursts of wind that stirred dust and pine needles across the forest floor. The roar of the engine grew louder as it hovered above a small open space just beyond the tree line. The paramedics moved quickly, carrying equipment and a folding stretcher as they emerged from the path leading into the clearing. Elaine stood back as the team surrounded her daughter. Her hands trembled as she pressed them to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. She watched every movement the paramedics made, unable to look away, even for a moment. One of them knelt beside Hannah and checked her pulse. Another placed 2 fingers beneath her jaw. A third gently lifted Hannah's eyelids with a gloved hand. "She is dehydrated and overheated," one paramedic said. "Her breathing is shallow. We need to get her cooled down and on oxygen right away." Elaine stepped closer. "Please help her," she whispered. "She has been in the sun too long." "We will," the paramedic said. "She is strong. She is still responsive." They lifted Hannah carefully, sliding the stretcher beneath her and securing straps across her chest and legs. Hannah let out a faint sound, a mixture of pain and exhaustion. Elaine bent over her and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "I am right here," she whispered. "Do not be afraid. You are safe now." Hannah's eyelids fluttered weakly, her lips parted, but her voice was barely audible beneath the noise of the helicopter. A paramedic lowered an oxygen mask over her face and adjusted the strap behind her head. A soft hiss filled the air as the oxygen began to flow. Hannah's breathing eased slightly. "Let's move," the lead paramedic said. They lifted the stretcher and began carrying it toward the helicopter. The wind from the blades whipped Elaine's clothes and hair as she hurried alongside them. Her hands never left the metal rail of the stretcher. She refused to let go. As they approached the helicopter, an officer opened the door and stepped aside. Elaine climbed in first, settling into a seat beside the stretcher. Her fingers closed around Hannah's hand, holding it firmly yet gently. Hannah's grip was faint but present. Elaine felt the small pressure and swallowed hard, fighting back tears. Inside the helicopter, the medical team worked quickly. They wiped Hannah's face with cool pads and monitored her pulse. The sound of the rotor blades thundered overhead, shaking the cabin with each rotation. The paramedic sitting opposite Elaine leaned forward slightly. "She is stabilizing," he said, "but she needs fluids and monitoring. The hospital is ready for her arrival." Elaine nodded. Her eyes never left her daughter. As the helicopter lifted off, sunlight rushed across the windows, turning everything white for a moment. The clearing below shrank. The trees blended into a patchwork of green and gold. The officers on the ground became small figures moving purposefully around the scene. And somewhere in that forest, Evan was still running. Deep in the woods, Evan pushed through branches and stumbled over roots as he tried to flee. His breath tore through his chest. Sweat, dirt, and panic coated his face. Every shout from the officers behind him made his heart slam painfully against his ribs. He could hear them. They were closer every second. He spotted the outline of his car through the trees. It was hidden behind a fallen log near a dirt path that fed into the main road outside Sun Peak Woods. Evan sprinted toward it, his legs burning, lungs screaming for relief. He yanked the door open and practically threw himself into the driver's seat. His hands shook violently as he jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered to life. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on." He slammed the car into gear and hit the accelerator. The tires spun in the loose dirt before lurching forward. The vehicle bounced wildly over rocks and ruts, swerving between the dense trees. Behind him, sirens shrieked. 2 patrol vehicles burst through the brush, their tires kicking up dirt as they began the chase. "Stop the vehicle," a voice called through the loudspeaker. "Put both hands on the wheel and pull over immediately." Evan pressed the accelerator harder. Branches whipped against the sides of the car. The frame rattled with each violent bump. He glimpsed the officers behind him through the mirror. They were not slowing down. He aimed for the narrow opening that led toward the main road. But the speed, the uneven ground, and the sheer panic coursing through his body created a deadly combination. As he rounded a sharp bend near a cluster of tall pine trunks, the front tires lost traction. The car veered. Evan jerked the wheel instinctively. The vehicle slid sideways. Dirt sprayed into the air as the car skidded across the ground and slammed violently into a massive tree. The impact exploded through the forest with a deep metallic crunch. The windshield spiderwebbed. The airbags burst forward, crushing Evan back into the seat. For a moment, there was only a ringing in his ears and the distant echo of sirens. Then the doors were yanked open. Multiple officers surrounded the car. One grabbed Evan's arm. Another pulled him out and dragged him toward the ground. A third officer positioned himself in front of Evan, hand on his holster, ready if Evan resisted. "Do not move," the officer closest to him shouted. "Put your hands behind your back." "Lot." Evan groaned, dazed and furious. "This was not supposed to happen," he muttered. "She did this. She ruined everything." "Put your hands behind your back," the officer repeated. Evan resisted for a second, twisting his shoulders, but the officers forced him down across the hood of the patrol car. His cheek pressed against the hot metal. The cuffs snapped around his wrists. "Evan Miles," the lead officer said loudly. "You are under arrest for kidnapping, assault on a pregnant woman, and attempted murder." Evan let out a hoarse cry, part rage and part disbelief. "It was never my fault," he yelled. "You do not understand. None of this was my fault." But the officers did not respond. They guided him into the back of the patrol vehicle while he continued to shout and thrash. High above the forest, the helicopter carrying Hannah and Elaine soared toward the hospital. Inside the cabin, a voice crackled through the crew's radio. "Be advised," the dispatcher said. "Suspect Evan Miles is in custody." Elaine's breath caught. She looked down at her daughter, brushed her thumb across Hannah's knuckles, and whispered, "It is over. You are safe." For the first time since the nightmare began, Hannah managed a faint, fragile smile from behind her oxygen mask, and as the helicopter pressed forward toward safety, the last glimpse of Sun Peak Woods disappeared behind them, swallowed by light. The helicopter descended toward St. Mary's Hospital in Colorado just as the late afternoon sun began to soften across the valley. Its blades cut through the thick air, sending a powerful wind across the landing pad, where a trauma team waited in crisp uniforms and ready hands. The moment the wheels touched the ground, the paramedics released the latch and swung the cabin door open. Dust and leaves swirled in circles around them as they pulled Hannah's stretcher out of the aircraft. Elaine climbed down right behind them, blinking against the strong downdraft as she hurried to keep up. Hannah lay motionless beneath the straps, her face pale and her body weak. The oxygen mask covered the lower half of her face, and her breathing remained shallow. The paramedics pushed the stretcher across the pad toward the sliding doors of the emergency wing. Elaine followed closely, refusing to fall behind even for a heartbeat. Inside the hospital, the noise shifted from the roar of helicopter blades to the steady rhythm of monitors and the shuffle of urgent footsteps. Nurses rushed out from the triage station, guiding the stretcher through a long corridor brightly lit with fluorescent lights. Doctors surrounded Hannah, checking her vitals, assigning orders, speaking in calm urgency. "She is severely dehydrated," one doctor said. "Pulse is unstable. Blood pressure is dropping. Prepare fluids," another said. "Start oxygen at a higher rate. We need fetal monitoring as soon as she is stabilized." Elaine moved aside only when a nurse gently pulled her back so the team could work. She pressed her hands against her lips, praying silently as she watched the doctors swarm around her daughter. Everything inside her ached as she heard the clipped exchanges of the medical staff. "Can you hear me, Hannah?" a nurse asked as she checked her pupils. "We are here. You are going to be all right." Hannah did not answer. She drifted somewhere between wakefulness and unconsciousness, her head lolling slightly to one side as the doctors guided the stretcher into a nearby trauma room. The doors swung shut in Elaine's face, leaving her alone in the hallway. She felt her knees weaken for a moment, and she gripped the railing along the wall for support. Her breath hitched as she heard muffled instructions behind the closed doors. "We need to cool her down. Start the IV now. Monitor the baby's heart rate." Elaine pressed her forehead against her hand and closed her eyes. She whispered a soft plea into the still air of the corridor. "Please save them both." Several minutes passed before a nurse stepped out from the room. Elaine rushed to her immediately. "Is she going to be all right?" she asked. The nurse spoke gently. "She is stable for now. She is exhausted and dehydrated, and her body has been under extreme stress. But her vitals are responding to treatment. We will move her to the ICU to monitor her and the baby closely." "And the baby," Elaine whispered. "Is my granddaughter still alive?" The nurse nodded. "There is a heartbeat. It is weak but steady. We will keep a close watch." Elaine covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Relief and fear flooded through her at the same time. The nurse placed a comforting hand on her arm. "You can see her soon," she said. Elaine nodded gratefully and took a seat outside the ICU wing. She wiped her tears with a trembling hand and waited, staring through the small window where she could see Hannah being moved into a private room filled with monitors. The soft beeping of the machines gave her something to cling to. Meanwhile, miles away at the county detention center, the night was unfolding very differently for Evan and Brittany. Brittany sat in a small interrogation room with her wrists cuffed to the table. Her hair was disheveled, and her eyes swollen from crying. The harsh lighting overhead reflected off the metal surface of the table. A detective stood across from her, arms crossed, a file of evidence resting in front of him. "You were part of this," the detective said. "We know you helped tie Hannah to the tree. We know you streamed it. We have your messages, your voice recordings. If you want any chance of leniency, now is the time to tell the truth." Brittany's lips trembled. "It was Evan," she said through a cracked voice. "He said I had to do it. He said it was the only way to prove she was lying. I did not want to hurt her. I just wanted him to love me." The detective leaned forward. "But you filmed her suffering. You threatened her life. You could have stopped it." Brittany sobbed into her hands. I know. I lost control. Everything got worse than I thought." In another room, Evan sat slumped in a chair, his wrists cuffed, his clothes torn from the chase and the crash. His eyes darted around as the detective placed photos and printed messages in front of him. "We have everything," the detective said. "The live stream, the texts, the audio clips, the footprints, Brittany's testimony. You orchestrated this." Evan shook his head. "She was lying. She always lies. That woman ruined everything." "No," the detective said. "You did." Back at Street, Mary's hospital, the world outside remained restless. News vans lined the sidewalks. Reporters stood in clusters delivering breaking updates. Flashing camera lights reflected against the glass doors of the hospital entrance. Crowds gathered with candles, flowers, and posters reading, "Justice for Hannah." The entire state seemed to be watching. Elaine finally stepped outside for a brief moment of air. She stood on the small balcony overlooking the parking lot, where journalists quickly rushed toward her. Microphones rose in front of her. "Miss Carter," one reporter called, "how is your daughter? What do you want to say to the community?" Elaine steadied her voice. "My daughter fought to stay alive today," she said. "Now we fight for justice, and for every woman who has been silenced or hurt the way she was." Lights flashed. People applauded softly from below the balcony. When Elaine returned to the ICU, she found Hannah lying still but breathing more comfortably. A gentle light glowed above the bed. The steady rhythm of the fetal monitor pulsed softly beside her. Hannah's eyelids fluttered as Elaine approached. "Mom," Hannah whispered. "I am here," Elaine said as she bent over and kissed her forehead. "The baby is alive." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she breathed. Elaine sat beside her and held her hand as the machines continued their steady, life-affirming rhythm. In that quiet moment, mother and daughter shared a fragile peace. Outside the ICU doors, officers prepared the paperwork to transfer Evan and Brittany to formal booking. The case would move to the courthouse next. The long night at the hospital was only beginning, but for the first time, hope filled the air. The morning sun rose clear and sharp over the Colorado mountains, sending long beams of golden light across the steps of the county courthouse. Reporters clustered near the entrance, their cameras ready, their voices low with anticipation. Inside, the sounds of quiet conversation echoed through the tall marble hallways as people filled the benches of the main courtroom. Everyone had come for one reason. Today was the day justice would finally be decided in broad daylight. Elaine pushed Hannah's wheelchair through the side entrance, guided by a hospital transport aide. Hannah sat wrapped in a soft blanket, her face pale but calmer than the day she had arrived at the hospital. A thin medical bracelet still encircled her wrist. Her breathing was steady now, and the faint rhythm of the baby's heartbeat had brought her strength during the long night in the ICU. The doctor had allowed her to leave temporarily for the hearing, but only with strict supervision. The hallway cleared as people recognized her. Conversations stopped. Several stood silently out of respect. Elaine kept her hands firm on the wheelchair handles as they approached the double doors of the courtroom. When they opened, dozens of heads turned at once. Inside, sunlight streamed in through tall windows, illuminating every corner of the room. The benches were packed with journalists, advocates for women's safety, community members, and families who had followed the case closely. Hannah felt a wave of emotion rise in her chest. It was not fear. It was something heavier, something long overdue. The bailiff called the courtroom to order. The judge entered and took his seat. Elaine parked the wheelchair in the front row, close to the witness stand. She placed a reassuring hand on Hannah's shoulder before sitting down. Across the room, Evan Miles was escorted in by two deputies. His wrists were cuffed, His hair was unkempt, his clothes wrinkled, and there was a deep tension in his jaw. He kept glancing around the courtroom, as if searching for a way to rewrite the reality unfolding before him. Beside him sat Brittany Cole, her face streaked with makeup from crying. Her hands trembled in her lap. She never lifted her eyes from the table. The judge cleared his throat. "We will now begin the evidentiary hearing regarding the charges against Evan Miles and Brittany Cole." Hull. The prosecutor stood and walked to the center of the room. He lifted a remote control and pressed a button. The large screen behind him lit up. The live stream began to play. There was no sound in the courtroom except the audio of the recording. The forest clearing appeared on the screen. The camera shook as voices argued off-frame. Then the terrible scene became clear. Hannah tied to the tree, Brittany holding a knife, Evan circling with the phone, the scorching sunlight, Hannah's pleading voice, Brittany's taunts, Evan's instructions. Some in the courtroom gasped softly, others pressed their hands to their mouths. The images were brutal, they were undeniable. The prosecutor let the entire clip play, not cutting a single second. The room watched until the video ended on the distorted frame of the tree. When the screen went dark, the prosecutor turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this is the full, unedited video as recorded by defendant Brittany Cole and streamed live to multiple viewers across the country." He turned again and held up a folder thick with printed pages. "We also have the messages exchanged between the defendants. These include detailed discussions about humiliating the victim and manipulating public perception. There are voice recordings of defendant Evan Miles planning the event. And we have the testimony of the officers who recovered the evidence and arrested the defendants." The judge nodded. "Proceed with your witnesses." A forensic specialist took the stand first. She confirmed the authenticity of the live stream and digital files. Next came the lead detective who described the chase, the crash, and the arrest. Then the attending trauma physician explained Hannah's condition upon arrival at the hospital. Her life was in immediate danger, the doctor said. Severe dehydration, heat stress, and physical trauma placed both her and the unborn child at high risk. If she had remained tied to that tree much longer, neither would have survived. Hannah closed her eyes as she listened. Elaine held her hand tightly. When it was Brittany's turn to speak, she rose slowly, supported by a deputy. Her voice shook as she addressed the court. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "I was wrong. I did everything Evan told me to do. I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid of losing him. He said we had to scare her. He said she deserved it. I believed him. I thought he loved me. I did not mean for it to go that far. I am sorry." Her sobs filled the room. The judge watched her carefully, taking notes. Then Evan stood. At first he tried to remain calm, but when the prosecutor asked why he tied his wife to a tree, he snapped. "She lies," he shouted. "She lies about everything. She wanted to make me look bad. She tried to ruin my life." "Did she tie herself?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes," Evan insisted. "She is manipulative. She does this for attention." The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "So she tied herself while 7 months pregnant, positioned the camera, and then begged for mercy while you filmed her?" Evan stammered. "She provoked us. You do not understand." The prosecutor's voice remained steady. "The video shows you tightening the rope. The video shows you laughing while she cried. The messages show you planned this. You orchestrated a violent act against a pregnant woman." Evan's mouth opened, but no words emerged. For the first time, he looked genuinely cornered. The judge leaned forward. "I have heard enough." The entire courtroom held its breath. "In the matter of the state of Colorado versus Evan Miles and Brittany Cole," the judge said, "this court finds the defendants guilty on all charges." A ripple moved through the room. "For defendant Evan Miles," the judge continued, "the sentence is 40 years in federal custody for kidnapping, aggravated assault on a pregnant woman, and attempted murder." Evan's knees nearly buckled as he was pulled back toward the deputies. For defendant Brittany Cole, the sentence is 25 years for her role as an accomplice in these acts. Brittany sobbed into her hands as she was led away. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. The sound of justice, spoken aloud, felt like a long exhale she had been holding in for days. Elaine wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders. Hannah leaned into her, overwhelmed by relief. "You are safe now," Elaine whispered. "It is over." The camera shutters clicked rapidly. The prosecutor shook hands with his team. Several people stood and clapped softly. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating Hannah's face with a warm glow, as if the entire room were opening toward hope. A nurse approached Hannah's wheelchair. "We need to take you back to the hospital for monitoring." Hannah nodded. Her tears sparkled in the light. As she was wheeled out of the courtroom, she took one last look at the emptying benches and the judge's bench glowing under the late-morning Sunday justice had been delivered. The darkness of Sun Peak Woods had finally been forced into the light. The doors closed behind them, ending the chapter and leading her into the next. 1 month had passed since the verdict, yet the memory of the courtroom still lived somewhere deep in Hannah's chest. The echoes of the judge's voice had stayed with her during every quiet moment in the hospital. Now, as the soft morning light streamed through the windows of Street Mary's, she sat upright in her bed while a nurse gently removed the last monitor from her arm. The room felt warmer today, calmer, almost like the world had finally decided to allow her to breathe again. The obstetrician reviewed the final chart with a thoughtful expression, then smiled. "Your baby is strong," she said. "Her heartbeat is steady. You are still recovering, so you will need follow-ups every week, but you are stable enough to go home today." Hannah nodded slowly as relief washed over her. Home. The word felt foreign after everything she had endured. But she was ready, more ready than she had ever been. Elaine entered the room with a small bag of folded clothes, her face full of tenderness. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "your discharge papers are ready." Hannah reached out, and her mother immediately took her hand. They did not need words. The connection between them had become a lifeline, something that had carried both of them through the darkest days. Together, they packed the few things Hannah kept at her bedside. Then they walked out of the hospital wing, one slow step at a time, with the gentle thumping of baby Grace as a reminder that the story had not ended in the forest. Outside, the crisp Colorado air brushed against Hannah's skin. Elaine helped her into the passenger seat of the car. They began the short drive back to Elaine's small house at the edge of Beacon Ridge. The mountains stretched high above them, capped with snow that sparkled beneath the afternoon sunday. For the first time in a long while, Hannah looked at the landscape and felt something like safety. When they arrived, Elaine opened the front door to reveal a living room carefully prepared for her return. A soft blanket lay draped across the couch. A table near the window held flowers, fresh soup, and small gifts wrapped in tissue paper. Several envelopes were tucked neatly into a woven basket. Elaine placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "The community wanted to help," she said. "People have been dropping things off every day." Hannah walked inside with slow steps, her heart unexpectedly full. She picked up one envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "You are brave. You survived. We stand with you." There were dozens more like it. Cards from neighbors she barely knew, letters from women across Colorado, messages from families who had watched the live stream and had cried for her. She sat down on the couch, holding the letters against her chest. The healing did not come instantly. Some days, fear followed her like a shadow. She met with a therapist recommended by the hospital. During their first session, she sat across from the doctor with her hands folded protectively over her belly. Her voice shook as she described the horror of being tied to the tree. The therapist listened carefully, guiding her breath, helping her separate the fear from the memory. "You are not back in the woods," the therapist said gently. "You are here. Your baby is safe. And you survived." Those words stayed with Hannah long after she left the office. At home, she spent quiet afternoons speaking softly to Grace, resting her hands over the round curve of her belly. She often sat near the window where the sunlight fell warm on her skin. She told her daughter about courage, about fighting to stay alive, about the bond they carried. Sometimes Grace responded with a gentle kick, and those moments became the brightest part of her days. "We made it," Hannah whispered during one of those evenings. "You and me." As her strength returned, she began thinking about what would come next. Something inside her refused to let the pain be meaningless. One morning she approached Elaine in the kitchen. "I want to start something," she said. "Something bigger than me. A place where women can go when they are afraid. A place where they know they are not alone." Elaine listened quietly, then smiled with pride. "Tell me what you need," she said. "Over the next few weeks, Hannah worked with local advocates, counselors, and volunteers to form an organization she named the Sunlight Shelter Foundation. The name came from the moment she remembered waking in the forest, the sunlight fighting through the trees during her worst hour. She wanted the same light to guide women who were still lost in their own darkness. The foundation grew quickly. Donations came from neighbors, churches, and even strangers who had followed her case. Soon they were ready to open their first small center in Beacon Ridge. The day of the opening arrived with clear skies and a warm breeze. A small crowd gathered outside the building. Reporters stood nearby. Families held signs of support. Hannah stepped toward the podium wearing a simple dress, her belly full and round with the life she had fought for. Elaine stood just behind her, her eyes glowing with pride. When Hannah began to speak, her voice trembled only for a moment before gaining strength. "They tied me to a tree to break me," she said, "but the sunlight saved me, and today that same light stands here with us. If I survived, then other women can survive. If I found help, then others should never have to search alone. This shelter is for them, for anyone who has been silenced, hurt, or afraid. You are not alone, not anymore." Lay? Applause rose around her, soft at first, then growing louder as more people wiped tears from their eyes. Hannah stepped back from the microphone, breathing deeply, feeling the fullness of the moment. Elaine wrapped her arms around her daughter from behind. Hannah covered her belly with both hands. Grace shifted gently beneath her skin as if acknowledging the warmth of the world waiting for her. A photographer captured the moment. 3 generations, 3 stories intertwined by pain, resilience, and hope. It was a single snapshot of a family that had refused to collapse under darkness. As the event ended, Hannah walked slowly toward the edge of the field behind the shelter. The afternoon sun lit everything in a soft gold. The wind carried the faint scent of pine. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth, letting the light settle across her skin. The chapter that had once nearly destroyed her had now become the beginning of something larger, something restorative, something bright. She opened her eyes. Her future was waiting in the sunlight, and she walked toward it.